Okay, I think we're up and running. TFT, the freelance teacher. I'm Doug Marola. I have Isaiah Rhodes here. Is it Elite Buckets? Is it Sports Writer Extreme, teacher of high school students? A grade school teacher, leader. I don't. What are you up to now? What are we approaching you as?
Well, on Twitter and Instagram, you can find me at Ask Isaiah, AskIsaiah. I cover many different sports: college basketball, high school basketball, and just an overall avid sports enthusiast all the way around. Um, Due to the coronavirus, sports has really taken a hit, as well as the entire world, and we've been on pause. So a lot of my work in terms of broadcasting these games and covering these games has had to take a stop as well. But one thing that we do have that has been holding us together as an entire world has been the Last Dance. That's really has what has glued everything together and kind of kept us entertained while we're in quarantine.
Good. I was actually thinking the same way. I don't know if it was, maybe you do, I don't, but I don't know if it was planned to come out now. It would have been the end of the regular season and
Right, right.
playoffs, and it
Mm-hmm.
would have been a weird two-lane road of actual NBA season and The Last Dance. If I don't know the scheduling, if it came out did it come out? Was this all planned to come out when it did, and it just happens to be coronavirus Sunday night filler?
No, initially it was supposed to come out in between the end of the NBA Finals and going into the next season.
Mm.
So really, it was supposed to be entertainment throughout the summer,
Mm-hmm.
and then that would have been like a bridge, a pseudo bridge into fall, going into the next season. But due to the stoppage in the NBA season, there was a outcry of expediting the process to get the documentary shown. And I think that it's definitely done great numbers from viewership perspective. In terms of historians of the game, it's definitely good to be reintroduced to certain concepts that you are aware of, but you get more uh, direct insight behind the scenes of. I think it came at the right time.
Um, One thing I've noticed is the different eras, and the main thing that I've noticed with the events going on in the series is like the light bulbs go off in my head. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's right. This was before the internet had done really
Mm-hmm.
any movement at all, and
Mm-hmm.
way, way, way before social media. Now, am I an angry, cranky old man yelling at the kids to get off his lawn? Or am I justified in saying it makes me miss that NBA and that idea that and all the negatives of social media and stuff that have come in with building your brand and team
Mm-hmm.
hopping and stuff like that? Like I feel real, and again, maybe it's just me being older and nostalgic, but that idea of like those people cared about their team winning in a manner that that I don't see as much today. Am I a cranky old dude who doesn't get it? Or am I seeing something that has been lost that was better than it is now?
Well, it's twofold in a lot of ways. I think when you look at specifically with this franchise, the Chicago Bulls, and you look at how management was run, it's sort of intertwined, right? For the game to go where it went, you needed a player like Michael Jordan and his brand to take the league where it went globally. But his brand grew in that way organically. There's a there's a part in the documentary. I think it's episode 5 when he says, "If I was averaging 4 points a game, I wouldn't have been able to sign with anybody. My game did most of my game was my biggest endorsement." And I think for him as a competitor, and we can when we dive into it, we'll see. He's a player that is an extreme self-motivator. He looked for things to keep him motivated at the highest level always. and to play at that level consistently and to dominate and to win in the fashion that he did, both creatively and fundamentally, that took him and the Chicago Bulls and the NBA to the next level. Now, when you have that type of reach and impact on the world like he had, now you have players coming up that want to follow him. And once a formula is created, everyone wants to follow it. So now you look for the wing player or the superstar that can be a brand for, let's say, Adidas or whatever it might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you build that. But now you're trying to build these players in this lane or in this vein, but do they have the same self-motivating qualities of a Michael Jordan? Do they have the same type of commitment to the craft like Michael Jordan? You know, before he was even Air Jordan, he was pursuing a championship. He was trying to be the best at what he did. It just so happened that all of these things fell into place at the right time. Not to be long-winded, but I also want to talk about from you brought up like team hopping and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've spoken in depth about super teams,
right,
and how that's constructed. In reality, all of the teams that were dynasties, if you look at them outside of the Pistons, which they wouldn't necessarily be considered the dynasty of like a Lakers or Chicago or even Boston to a degree, but they did go to 3 straight finals.
yes,
Outside of that Pistons group, you had a Celtics team that had 5 Hall of Famers on it at one time. This is the Larry Bird Celtics.
yes,
Then you had the Lakers with Kareem and Magic that have 5 Hall of Famers as well.
mm-hmm.
You have teams that were able to be together for 8 years at a time, 10 years at a time, core teams. That doesn't happen today because of the way money is handled now. Back then, you can look at a Chicago team that was built on a horrendous contract. When you look at Michael Jordan, who was severely underpaid due to the value that he held for the league, he was underpaid.
Right.
Scottie Pippen, underpaid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they go at length in speaking about that. So now you have players now that, while there are many players that are overpaid, if you put that in perspective due to where the league is at, it's only right that players have the type of monetary, impact that they have now compared to, let's say, when Magic Johnson was playing for the Lakers, he signed a 25-year contract for $25 million.
That's right. I forgot about that.
You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
talk about a bad contract. That makes
Right.
Pippen's contract look like he hit the lottery.
And in hindsight, to your point about, a commitment to winning, it was more about security. Once you got the security, then you could focus on the craft. Whereas now with players, when they know that they have the opportunity to go to the NBA, once they get there, they're going to get the security. Do they have the same commitment to winning? It might not be the same. Now the outliers, the ones that are special, the ones that are great anyway, the money will be there for them. They don't really focus on that. But I think it has changed the way that teams are built. It has changed the way that, that franchises can commit to a window, because now you see if this player doesn't win within a 3 to 4 year window, they're going to leave. As opposed to in the 80s, you knew I had Doug Marola for 8 years. I had Isaiah for 10 years. So we can really work at this.
Yeah. And I didn't think of it that way. I'm glad I'm glad that we're talking, because, it's funny. I think of the I don't know, the someone like Kevin Durant lost a lot of credibility by jumping to the Golden State Warriors, which had already won a championship. So, and building this super team, or the LeBron Heat down in Miami, and they win 2 out of 4 years. But yeah, you're right. The super team thing, maybe because they had to build it differently.
Right.
They had
Right.
much more severe headwinds. When you
Right.
look at what Red Auerbach had to do to build those super teams, there are some crafty trades in there. I mean, to get
Mm-hmm.
Robert Parrish
Right.
From Golden State, which people forget about, or to get the draft Bird in effect before he's eligible
Right.
and roll the dice.
A year before he even comes to the league. Right.
Yeah, he
So you
can't.
have his whole rights before he
Yes,
even gets right.
right. And what if something had gone wrong? I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
that dynasty. They before Bird showed up, the Celtics were terrible,
Mm-hmm.
and they had completely fallen apart. And so, and I guess that so it was drafting, creative trades, things like that. Maybe because the headwinds were stronger,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's where I get cranky about it. But that super team idea you're talking about is a very and the fact that it was then two is a really good comment, because Jordan had people forget about. I mean, they brought up the 1986 first round series where the Bulls got swept, but Jordan
Right.
went bananas.
Mm-hmm.
But they had the Celtics dominating the world,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had the Pistons, and then they were able to claw past Detroit and get into the bright lights. But I think it shows you, because you mentioned contracts and how many years you'd have players.
Right.
One of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking about that was how you don't hear much either from David Falk, who was Jordan's agent, or Jordan himself talk much about money.
Right. And that's where, to your point, it might have gotten lost from a generational standpoint. Like the goal is to be the very best at
Yes,
what you do.
right.
And when you're the best at what you do, everything else will fall into place. Now they mentioned, where the sneaker contract was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Converse had deals with Dr. J, Larry, Magic, but it wasn't as big it wasn't a necessity like it is now. Like
Right.
every athlete has their own shoe. Then if you're special, you get a signature. But back then it wasn't like it is now.
Mm-hmm.
So to see where Falk wanted to use Jordan, as they mentioned, built almost marketing him like a tennis player, almost separate from the team.
Mm-hmm.
To do that and to take it where it went, it's a timing thing. Because I'm sure if Dr. J would have came along in the late 80s and early 90s in his prime,
Mm-hmm.
it probably would have been a similar thing. But you needed those building blocks to get to where Jordan was. Now, it just so happens that he was so laser focused on winning that once you win, everybody wants to be a part of a winner,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Now, I, now to your point about where teams are, where the Chicago Bulls were before Michael Jordan was non-existent. You had so now you have a player that's a savior in a sense to where at least the Celtics had pedigree before Larry came.
Right.
They Bill Russell, Auerbach, Cousy, Sam Jones, those guys, they
Mm-hmm.
built a foundation. With the Lakers, you got, even though it's far removed, you still had George Mikan. You still had that type of lineage. You got Jerry
Mm-hmm.
West, Will Chamberlain. So there's a foundation. Chicago didn't have anything. So you add that into the mix, and now they're coming out of nowhere and taking over the world. It's like, oh my God. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that only added to the fire even more.
Mm-hmm. And the with the money stuff,
Mm-hmm.
they went into detail about Pippen's contract, and I remembered that.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I remember all. I graduated from high school in 1990,
Right.
so the Jordan dynasty I saw up close and personal as a Knicks fan. I lost a couple of years from out of my soul by
Right.
getting crushed enough times, but that's another podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I need to see my therapist. But the Pippen contract, I knew he was underpaid.
Right.
What I did not remember was, and I knew he wasn't even number 2 on his team. I knew he was, I think it was fifth or sixth, which I remember something like that. But it was something like 130th in the NBA.
Right now,
I'd forgotten about that. That's completely insane.
Now watch this, right? You can see in the beginning when Reinsdorf tells Pippen, I wouldn't sign that.
That's right.
Now, at the time when he signs it, relative to the time, it's a good contract.
Mm-hmm.
But Reinsdorf understood that, especially having Michael Jordan on your team, the market value, not only for the Bulls, but for the entire league is going to, as time goes on, that's going to be a horrible contract.
Yes.
He tells him, I wouldn't sign it. Now, in hindsight, Pippen says, I needed the security for my family. And you worry about injuries and stuff like that, which that does make sense from a rational standpoint. But when Reinsdorf says, if you sign this, don't come back to renegotiate, he really means that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same way for Michael Jordan. The only difference is Michael Jordan was able to create avenues outside of the game so that he wouldn't have to worry about the NBA contract.
Right. And that was the talk then. I remember the talk then because Jordan was the numbers I'm pulling out of ancient memories, but it was something like Jordan was making $3 million a year and was ridiculously underpaid, but
for what he meant to the league.
Right. So, the rumor was that it was 30 million coming in from Nike and Gatorade and all of these other things. So Jordan didn't. It not only does it not come up in the documentary because Grant leaving because of money and feeling underappreciated, he goes to Orlando. Pippen's contract, and you hear none of that money stuff with Jordan. I think it really shows the difference of the person, of the man, where it's almost like I want to be the best. I want to win at all costs. I don't care if I alienate anybody. Right. And with that being the prime focus, the other things, it's almost like he got like the luck. I don't know. Luck is the residue of design, is the Branch Rickey quote. Like all of these other things, David Falk, and I think was it Jordan's mother or father who made him go to the Nike meeting because he was going to blow it off. Yeah, he was going to blow it off, which at the time made perfect sense because
Nike was non-existent as a
basketball shoe. It was a joke. So, and then the book, by the way, right? English teacher going to give you a book recommendation. Of course, you may have read it though. David Halberstam's Playing for Keeps. Goes through that process, chapter and verse. And Halberstam was a trained historian. This is not, Doug Marola, pounding away on a keyboard in his mom's basement apartment upstate. This is Halberstam. That book is great, as is Falk's book, The Bald Truth. Both of those I highly recommend. They're just granular detail on it, and it's just fantastic information. But that dollar salary thing, Jordan doesn't talk about it. Reinsdorf in the documentary doesn't talk about it with Jordan. Krause, you hear about how the whole Krause thing happened and how he's almost like his own worst enemy. But what none of them ever talk about was that, you don't hear Jordan talk about, I had contract issues, the dollars weren't right, either in the flashbacks or when they're talking to Jordan in his chair. Right. It's really interesting stuff.
I think in a lot of ways, which you brought up the flashbacks, I love the way that they frame the documentary.
Yes. Fantastic.
It's marketed like the 98 season, which they do reference. Yes. But it's really a foundation point for the documentary to build on why this 98 season specifically is so important. So while they go through the 98 season, they also go all the way back. So when the 98 season starts, they go to the start of Jordan's trajectory. Right. And it flows together. So it's basically two storylines. And I want to preface this by saying it's a reason why that was the contractual issue was so poignant for Scottie compared to Michael psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're Scottie Pippen, as great as you are defensively, as a playmaker, as a as a compliment to the greatest player of all time, I think he always felt underappreciated. He always felt undervalued because Michael got more attention.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality. When you're with Michael Jordan, it's easy to undersell someone that gives you exceptional defense, gives you a consistent 17 points. He might throw in 10 rebounds. He might give you 6 steals, but he's going to do the little things that might get lost. So for him, he expected a lot more appreciation compared to, those that maybe his counterparts who aren't as good as him or as valuable as him. So I think for him to go through that year in and year out, knowing that they're winning and he's not getting the appreciation, that was an issue for him. Now you mentioned Horace. They mentioned it in the documentary that Horace had an issue with not being appreciated as well. And I think especially in that first three-peat where Michael was so hell-bent on catching Magic, catching Bird, catching Isaiah, that at times he probably rode them a little too hard. Probably is an understatement. He did.
Yes.
But he was willing to pay that cost. And I think over time you see with a lot of the teammates, they'll say, even though it was rough then, we understand where he was. We understand why he was. And Phil always understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
the 2 points about that, because you realize how valuable Grant was to that team, because the first year Jordan leaves, the 93-94 team, I checked it the other day. I mean, well over 50 wins.
55.
55 wins. They do damage in the playoffs. Obviously, don't win the title. But although they kind of, they get snookered by the Knicks, but they were a good team. That
Right.
team could flat out play. Then Grant leaves,
goes to the Magic,
and they're a 500 club. That team without Grant in there was a huge drop off. So in a sense, Horace Grant was vindicated because what he brought to that club was intense. And he goes to Orlando and they make the finals.
Yeah, I mean it's twofold also, because not only do you lose Horace, but Cartwright retires. You don't have Paxson, the shooting. So there's a lot of different dynamics that once Jordan left, a lot of people that were comfortable on that train, they either retire or they go away to a different squad. So a lot of the core pieces outside of Michael Jordan leave. To your point, they go to 500. Once they get Jordan back, you can see in the documentary yesterday, players around the league automatically said, okay, they're contenders again. And they went 13-4 in the 17 games that he came back regular season wise. They beat Charlotte in the first round. So they're on that trajectory of going. But I think they did an exceptional job and really breaking down why he wasn't in shape. You know, as an athlete, yes, he's in shape, but it wasn't the same type of training compared for baseball and basketball. So I thought that was important to really distinguish that, because I don't think a lot of people really understand, you know, why he wasn't the same Jordan as he was prior.
Right, and I liked it that they went into detail with the baseball, and it's difficult for me to say nice things about Jerry Reinsdorf, but he, I think, was not talking hype when he said if he had another year, 2 or 3, that Jordan would have made the majors. I mean, AA ball is kind of like the cutoff
before the majors.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can, so and no, very few people jump right into AA ball. Your top prospects, unless they're completely out of this world. There are a few exceptions, of course, but AA ball is really the separation between has a chance and doesn't have a chance.
Mm.
And so the other pitchers figured out that he couldn't hit breaking pitches, curveballs and sliders and what have you. But and Jordan's AA numbers are not terrible, but I know it sounds a little crazy, but to jump into AA baseball and hit 202, steal 50 bases, have a 13-game hitting streak, and continue to improve and have the humility of all things with Michael Jordan to come early, practice, play the game, leave late, practice, is really a testament to the overall athleticism that he had, because people don't realize how hard it is. I mean, the best players in the world get to AA baseball. I went to college with a guy who reset the University of Iowa record book, a guy named Brett Backlund. He was a right-handed pitcher. He got drafted by the Pirates very high up. He never made the majors, but he made AA and AAA, and he completely just, again, University of Iowa, this is Division I, Big Ten. This is not, nonsense community college ball. This is the top. And destroyed the University of Iowa record book. And all the old records were held by a former major league pitcher. And he did not make the majors. And he did not excel at AA or AAA. And Jordan jumps into AA ball. And I think I thought Sports Illustrated was too harsh even at the time.
Right.
It was telling the Planet with that cover, "Bag it, Michael." I don't think Jordan's I don't think you can blame him too badly for not talking to SI after that, because that was hitting below the belt. It's very difficult what he did. His book after that was something like I can't not try, something like that. Like he had a little book on it afterwards that I read and remember. But I'm glad that the documentary went into that part seriously, because it shows you a little bit more of a humble side. And I think he was justifiably angry. Real quick, I think it was in Zach Lowe's podcast. He was talking with someone, Jack McCallum or Jackie McMullen. I can't remember now, but I think it was Jackie McMullen who she wrote for Sports Illustrated. And it was early in the Jordan and she were talking. And he was talking to her about how things were when the games started at the beginning of the baseball season. And it was one of these times when Jordan, I think he struck out and he went into the clubhouse and, bashed a chair apart and, destroyed property or something, went crazy and didn't run out the ball. And Terry Francona pulled him aside and said, "Are you going to do that every time that happens?" And Jordan said, "I'm sorry, Skip, it won't happen again." And it didn't. Now, this is the guy who's king of the world, dream team, on posters in dorm rooms. This guy was running the sports world in effect. And he tells Terry Francona, who hadn't managed a major league game at that point, Tito Francona, Terry's father, was the more famous ball player. And he, very humbly says, "It won't happen again." So I'm glad they took that baseball part seriously, because it shows you a much more rounded version of the Jordan story.
Well, I want to ask you, because when he retires in '93, I'm 3 years old.
I was 21.
I don't really have that era of Jordan in my mind. My Jordan starts post Space Jam.
Right.
So for you, can you really, I think they do a great job of really, and as a historian, I understand it, but I think really being there, being in the moment, can you just explain how seismic it was for the world? Because I think one thing I want to point out before I actually get to my question is they do a great job of setting the tone and setting the how grandiose he actually was as not the basketball player, but I'm talking about the icon. When Robin Roberts says we have to observe a moment of silence because Michael Jordan is back in basketball, she's not exaggerating.
No.
You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
So for you, can you just describe how seismic it was when he retired in '93? Like, what did it do in the world?
Yeah, well, it blew up the sports world because you had and there are a couple of layers to it, but the main ones were I believe Jordan was 31
Mm.
at the time, and
Prime.
yeah, in his prime. So that was something that did not happen. So
Mm.
it was unfathomable that he would do that.
Mm.
So now you have all the chatter about, well, he retired while he was on top, which makes
Right.
sense. A lot of guys want to retire after they win the title. Okay, great. But 31 years old, had played, what he had played 10 seasons, something like that, 11 maybe.
Well, no, at that time it was 9.
It was
But
9 seasons, right?
one of them was not really. It was 8 because of the injury in '86.
Right, that second year when he barely played. So the good point. So it was too short of a career. It didn't make sense. You had the cloud of his father's murder
Mm-hmm.
in the mix as well,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a little bit of well, it was a huge event, but what people forget is that you had with the new sport thing, you had Bo Jackson 5 years before that picking up a new hobby and becoming an all-pro running back with the Raiders. In
Mm-hmm.
addition to being a 1989 starting outfielder with the Royals in the All-Star game,
Right.
catching baseballs with his bare hands
Mm-hmm.
and throwing guys out at the plate. So Bo Jackson was the baseball football guy. Deion Sanders took a run at it as well, one of the best defensive backs you'll ever see, and played baseball and didn't embarrass himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Brian Jordan, who everybody has totally forgotten about.
Right.
Who was a legitimate defensive back with the Atlanta Hawks, a really good one, and a really good outfielder for the Atlanta Braves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Brian Jordan was the real thing. He could flat out play.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird because the extra sport thing people weren't pulling their hair out and like, oh, he's going to play another sport. What is he thinking? Because of all the names I mentioned previously.
Right. It wasn't foreign.
Right. And so you had the retirement thing, and that's why because he seems like such a great guy and such a good father that you had the cloud of his father's murder, James
Mm-hmm.
Jordan. It really clouded the whole thing because and that's why some of the rumors got started, because it made so little sense. No reporter, no fan, no kid in his college dorm room, which I was 21 years old,
Mm-hmm.
could figure out. You play 9 seasons, you're at the top of your game, you're 31, and you retire. So I can only imagine in today's unfortunate world of social media and this vapor culture that we're just, it's just like steam. It's just constantly fizzing. If he did that now, the nutty rumors that would get started and all of the chaos that would ensue in today's world, it's kind of fortunate that it happened then, in that kind of nastiness didn't get completely out of control. But that was really the overlying thing. And then he comes out with the baseball stuff, and you're right. It was a completely seismic deal, and the secondary things around it made it a little darker than it normally would have been.
I want to touch on that too. They do mention it throughout, but you can see the climate of media is much more different. I think prior to Michael Jordan, the way the media moved, they had a lot more. Their vantage point was more geared towards the fan in terms of the type of storylines that they wanted to sensationalize or build up, and even in the way they used to conduct their interviews post game, it was a lot more freedom on their end compared to what it is now. All of the images are so much more protected because of Michael Jordan. Now, you try to, mold a certain way. But I think that you mentioned the cloud that was around Jordan due to his father dying and just the whole gambling and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so much of that wouldn't happen now because the media then they wanted all of their access, but it wasn't given to them in the same fashion that we have now with social media. A
Mm-hmm.
player will volunteer what they want to through their platform, through their medium, compared to back then where we didn't have the social media. So the only access we had to an athlete was when they played or if they did an interview,
Right.
you know,
Right.
with
With the
Connie Chung
press.
or Barbara
Right.
Walters. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Right.
that's the
So.
thing with the gambling stuff with Jordan in Atlantic City. That was a Dave Anderson column in the New
Mm,
York Times of all places.
mm,
And it was, you think about it now with everybody with a camera. And I believe Jordan when he talks about it, like it's not that big of a deal.
mm,
I went to escape the chaos of New York, very understandable.
right.
And I needed to get away and reset. And I go down to Vegas, which is not that, or go down to Atlantic City, which is not ridiculously far away.
Mm,
And I gamble into the late hours of the night. Okay. If you'll remember in the earlier ones, and now it's in the earlier episodes, but it's later on in the second Bulls dynasty, Phil Jackson has the presence of mind to let Dennis Rodman go to Vegas, completely lose his mind.
mm-hmm.
And it was actually for the best. And this
Right.
Jordan gambling stuff, it really shows you a sign of the times. It was explosive in
Mm,
New York at the time. I remember that. And it was how can he do that? He doesn't care about the team, all
right.
of this kind of stuff.
Mm,
I'm not a fan of the corporate press. So this is them showing their hand and being kind of nonsensical, but it really shows a sign of the times where, I mean, that's a non-event now. Not that the late night gambling thing wouldn't come up, but
it wouldn't be sensationalized as it was then.
and they wouldn't have done it. Now I'm sure guys play all kinds of games and cards and stuff to hours of the night in their private room with their
Right.
private group because
Right.
they know if they go out on the floor to play blackjack or to play dice or whatever, there's someone with a camera
Or that's gonna blow it
and
up
they're
and.
going to totally blow it up. So now those people can't do that at
See, now,
all.
to 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 that point, I think that at that time, especially that window for Michael Jordan at 91 to 93,
Hmm.
because he had taken the league to such heights, it opened up so many it opened up the tabloid side of the media to the sports world.
Hmm.
Whereas before, you can look at like Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle in New York. They had a lot of different exploits in their uh, proclivities and
Hmm.
vices that they had, but the tabloid side of media wasn't there yet for sports.
Right.
So they were able to be in the shadows with a lot, and you only worry about when you see me at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, you know? I mean, 3
Right.
p.m. on a Saturday.
Right.
Whereas once you started to see Michael Jordan take the league where it went, now you have so many different outlets that don't have anything to do with sport added with sport. Now, like what Sam Smith's book, why it was so explosive, which is they wanted to see behind the curtain.
Yep.
What is it that makes these guys tick?
I
Is
remember
Michael
that.
Jordan really this perfect? So that happened, and I think the reason why he retired, it was almost like to prove a point. Like, okay, not I mean outside of him and his personal reasons, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it proved a point saying, I leave this game, and the media realized and the league realized how much they needed Michael Jordan.
Hmm.
So that when he comes back, they're almost apologetic, like, wow, like I we're sorry that we treated you this way
Hmm.
over
Yeah.
those previous 2 years. Like we needed you.
Yes. Yeah.
You know?
Because and it made that retirement in 98 in after the last dance even worse because in my opinion, we don't need to go down this road. We've talked about it before, but that kind of like high school era, 1998 to 2006, 7 era in the NBA is one of my least favorite
Right.
that brand of basketball, and all these general managers making colossal mistakes, thinking they're all finding the next Kevin Garnett or Kobe Bryant.
Mm.
That's a terrible era in my opinion. But that being said, if you had to pick, even though you're quite a bit younger than I am, but you can still access the 90s in your head,
Mm.
and you follow basketball very closely as a reader and a writer and historian in the sport, which three, which group of three, that first trilogy of championships, the Grant, Jordan, Pippen teams, Paxson, or the Kerr, Rodman, Pippen teams, which teams do you think were better? Which trio do you think is the better trio?
Okay, you got to look at it two ways. I think the best Bulls team is the 92 Bulls team because
Nice. Well said. Go.
the 92 Bulls team is the most versatile of all of the teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they can play any type of style. If you look at where the league was late 80s going into the 90s, you had the shift come from the bad boys. You look at the Larry Bird Magic era of the early 80s going into the mid 80s, you saw fast-paced basketball,
Mm-hmm.
tough fouls, but the flow of the game was a lot faster. The Pistons played the same way, but they roughed the game up.
Right.
And the Bulls came up in that. So they had to build towards that. But they had shooting with Paxson, Hodges, and BJ.
Right.
You had interior presence with Grant, Livingston, Scott Williams. I don't want to add Will Perdue in there in terms of contributing offensively, but
Mm-hmm.
he was there as a body, so they had interior presence.
Right. And
And
he'd
then
start 10 games a year for a
right,
championship club.
and then you have the wing defense of a Jordan and Pippen at their apex. Was
Right.
Jordan at his apex and Pippen growing into who he would become.
Right.
But I think from a balance standpoint, that team is better. And I think from a competition standpoint, that Bulls team went through a tougher road
Mm-hmm.
to actually become champion. They
Right.
went through a tougher road because that Pistons team brought the absolute best out of them to prepare them for what they went through the entire 90s.
Right.
So that group is better to me, but I want to give the second group credit because they were older. They were the oldest team in the league at that time.
That's true.
So to be
Yeah.
able to extend in the fashion that they did.
Yeah. To
To
think
be
about a
able
bunch.
to,
Yeah, to think about a bunch of guys. I don't mean to cut you off, but that's another thing I hadn't thought of, just in a very elemental sense. A bunch of guys in their 30s
right,
dominated the league.
right,
And Jordan, my mom's a passive basketball fan, but she knows her stuff, because she had a 20-year-old son at home, going basketball crazy all the time. And she mentioned, that Jordan had lost some, but not all of his athleticism.
right.
And which is another thing that ties into what you're talking about. A bunch of guys in their 30s
Mm.
gave out serious lessons
To younger teams.
Yes.
You had that Sonics team who
Yep.
were in their prime.
Yep.
You had the Magic team in their prime.
Yep.
Now that Knicks team that you're talking about, that was very, very good. It's just so sad because, that's the bricks to the game sometimes. You have a lot of great teams. That Cleveland team, that Knicks team.
Right.
Early Cleveland, though. I'm talking about Mark Price,
Yes.
Brad Doherty, like that
Right.
era.
They were really good. I just, while you were talking, I looked at the 92 Bulls path: Miami, New York, Cleveland, and then they beat Portland. That Cleveland team, and Zach Lowe brought this up in his podcast, which is why I listened to him a fair amount, is that Cleveland team was good. I mean, you had Brad Doherty, who was a Carolina product. Mark Price, in today's game, Mark Price would be God with the way
amazing.
they breeze. Can you imagine Mark Price today?
Yeah,
Forget about it. And he was hard edged.
Right. I think that group plus New York in the early 90s was the perfect barometer for what the Bulls had to go through in the East. And then when you go to the second group, the Knicks are still there, but
Mm-hmm.
now you have Miami, now
Right.
you have Indiana. You get what I'm saying? So each algorithm of the Bulls
Mm-hmm.
had to go through a specific foe for that era that I
Mm-hmm.
think fit them.
Yes.
You know,
And
because that Bulls team ended up having to go up against an old Utah team
right.
with, you get what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Yeah, a team that Utah team made zero stupid mistakes a
right,
game. None. You couldn't say, oh, let's wait them out and they'll make some doofy. It doesn't happen. And
right.
that's the thing with the early Cleveland team. That's why the 92 team, I'm with you on being really, really good.
Mhm.
People really forget that path. Miami, New York Knicks, Cleveland, they had, I mean, going back to Mark Price, I don't think I'm wrong. If he played for the Warriors today and he were 26 years old, 27 years old, he'd be, I'm going to conservatively say he'd be 85% what Steph Curry is now. He was
Or, or
that good of a shooter.
or even I wouldn't even say that Warriors. I'd probably say, what about Steve Nash with the Suns?
That's right.
You get what I'm saying? Like
Yep.
the just not even having to change his game. Mark Price's game exactly the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
being able to maneuver screens, set up shots, but he wasn't the if you measure him by like volume of assists, he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that type of guy,
Right.
but he was a quality passer.
Right.
And I feel like with a system like the Warriors, like you're saying, that has the
Mm-hmm.
floor space and that type of shooting, plus the way the game is called now,
Mm-hmm.
he extends his career a lot better than he did.
Right.
I think Price will fit well in today's game.
And think about Larry Nance. I mean, guys like Larry Nance, Hot Rod Williams, Craig Elo would come in there and mix it up. That team was really, really good. And
Right.
people don't understand that Cleveland was going to be it was scheduled. The schedule said on paper that Cleveland was going to be one of these teams of the 90s. The
Right.
Cleveland had been a laughingstock joke of a franchise all
Mm-hmm.
throughout the 80s. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
remember World B. Free chucking it up
It's just
with the Cavaliers because I think he played for them. I think Doug Marola played for them. Isaiah Rhodes came off the bench.
mm.
My buddy Hector came in at small forward. Like it was that those teams were awful. So World B. Free is just chucking it up there, scoring 30 a night because who
mm-hmm.
cares? I mean, the Cavs were terrible. And so then they rebuild the club. They've got good, smart players. Dougherty was a 20 and 10 guy. You could write it in stone. Larry
Mm-hmm.
Nance was one of these dunk contest 6'10 forward guys. They
Lenny
could
Wilkins, great coach.
Lenny Wilkins, steering the ship. That team was serious. And Jordan has turned them into a footnote.
And that is where I feel like the documentary they do a good job
Yes.
of highlighting the teams,
Yes.
but I think they have to go more in detail in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how the series went.
Right.
Like like for example, they speak about the Knicks and they break down why they're important for the Bulls story, but I don't think they really break down, and maybe it's a time constraint, but they don't really break down why certain series are important.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about the Charles Smith series and
Yes.
why that miss was so important, or
Oh,
you speak about the Jordan gambling, right?
right.
But you gotta go into depth about the Bulls played the Knicks 6 times in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
The the 92 series in which the Bulls played, they went 7 games with the Knicks. Michael Jordan had to score 42 points in game 7 for them to win that game, for them
Yep.
to win that series.
Yes.
You have to really go in depth about why certain teams are important.
Mm-hmm.
So when you speak about Cleveland and you speak about this group, the Bulls played them 3 times. Michael Jordan not only built one of the illustrious clutch careers off of their back.
Mm-hmm.
But just going game to game, certain games hold more significance because of how deep the series went. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think that's where they missed the mark just a little bit. Like you got to go a little deeper into certain series or certain
Mm-hmm.
teams.
Of the teams, of the 6 championship winning teams, I
Mm-hmm.
want you to think about the teams that lost.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a team that you think was? Let me ask it this way. And I think my answer will surprise you, but I want to know which team of those 6. Well, actually, it's 5 because they met Utah twice.
Right.
Which of those teams do you think had the best chance or should have won, in your opinion?
Okay. I like Phoenix 93
Mm-hmm.
and I like hmm,
But
just
while you think, let me tell you. Let
I
me.
was gonna say 2, but then
Uh,
every time I think about it, I don't want to give them any credit. So I
yeah.
say I was gonna say it's definitely Phoenix 93
Right.
in Utah 98.
Uh-huh.
But the reason why I can never give Utah any credit is because as great as he is, Karl Malone just doesn't finish. But I think from a balance standpoint in the team, I thought that because the Bulls are older, like they're running on fumes in '98,
Mm-hmm.
so that Utah team should have been able to find a way to finish,
Right.
but they just couldn't. But I think in terms of where they are age-wise, you
Mm-hmm.
got Barkley in his prime,
Yep.
you got the shooting, you got the defense, you got a 1-2 punch with Kevin Johnson who could score also.
Right.
I thought that Phoenix is probably, if you give them another shot at it, they probably can win. But I
Mm-hmm.
think Charles he mentioned it in the post interview with Scott Van Pelt. He said that the first game that they played, he didn't have the team ready, and I think that hurt them because
Yes.
you can't go down 0-2 when you have home court advantage. You just
Right.
can't do that.
No. No. And that's the thing where, because I remember, because I'm old enough to think maybe this is the team that beats Chicago. And I was thinking that to some degree with a few of them. But and I know people are going to laugh, and my legions of fans are going to send me all kinds of crazy messages on this one, and the comments are going to be a disaster. But
Okay.
and I know they embarrassed themselves because they just talked about it. But the Seattle team was stacked. Now
They,
I don't know if George Karl made a mistake.
they're in their prime.
Yes,
They're in their prime.
and they didn't have an answer for Sean Kemp,
Mm-hmm.
right? They didn't have an answer for. I mean, Sean Kemp devoured people like Scottie Pippen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was a force, and I remember when those two teams met, and I know this Bulls won the first 3 games, and Seattle kind of came back, and I don't know if George Karl made a mistake. I think he made a mistake by not saying from the beginning, Gary Payton, you stick Jordan. This is your year to show everybody, including yourself and me, that you're going to do what no one in the world has done,
Yeah.
and you're going to lead the team to victory over these guys. And it didn't work out. But I remember before that series started, I'm like, this could be pretty good, because I remember the same thing like you said with Phoenix. I was the right age. I was in my 20s, and I think that's why you pinning Phoenix as maybe one of them is right, because I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, this team, and people forget Paul Westphal had taken over for Cotton Fitzsimmons. Fitzsimmons had rebuilt the Phoenix Suns franchise, handed off the baton to Paul Westphal, who was a good coach,
Mm-hmm.
and they Barkley
player too.
Yes, yeah, right. People forget that too. Yeah, you know that. Most people don't. And so you had a former NBA player, Westphal, took over the team after Fitzsimmons had rebuilt the entire franchise from the ground up. They're a 50-win team. They get Barkley from the Sixers.
You go to and turn into a 60 win team.
Right, and I think what the Suns, the Sixers got basically nothing. They got a Tom Chambers autographed jersey, I think, in return for Charles Barkley. And so that team could have been the team of destiny, but Charles Barkley not having the team ready that one game, that's now Jordan's foot's in the door, and that's all he needs.
That's all he needed.
That's it.
I wanna go to your point about Seattle, because this is where revisionist history, especially with the era thing, people are now turning the Michael Jordan era into tomato cans, but that 96 to and we spoke about this a lot about expansion. Yes, expansion did shift the records slightly, but the teams that won were already good. So you had the Bulls won 72, the Sonics won 64, the Knicks won 60, you had the Magic that won close to 60. So you have a lot of teams that won a lot of games.
Yes.
Quality teams.
Yes.
I feel like the reason why Seattle, even though they went to the finals in 96, they burnt out 94, 95, trying to get to the finals, but were losing early. They were losing in the first round. They lost to Denver when they had the number 1 seed in 94.
Oh, so that was an embarrassment. Yeah, to a young Dikembe Mutombo-led Nuggets. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, my God.
And another thing which gets lost is that Houston team.
Right.
The Houston is like Phoenix couldn't beat Houston, and Houston couldn't beat Seattle. So it's like they beat up on each other just to get to the finals, but they weren't able to repeat. The only one that was able to get to the finals back-to-back was Utah.
Right.
So I think that throws off, you know what I mean? That throws off a lot of people's opinions of the opposition at that time.
Right.
But they were beating up on each other to get there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think Seattle is being made to look, as you saw at the end at one of his last 2 episodes where, Jordan is looking at the tablet and hearing Gary Payton, talk, I had to come in and guard him. And Jordan laughs. He's like, I don't have any problem with the glove.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with that.
I mean, whether, to your point, whether it was the right decision or not, the idea to save Gary on the defensive end because of the scoring, in theory, that's a good point. But once you see, especially when you get to game 1, all right, let's try it for game 1, see what happens.
Right.
He destroys them.
Yes.
They're down 0-1. Now you have to reassess what you want to do, because you don't have the luxury of time.
Right.
You may now Gary scraps everything after they go down 3-0. By the time you go down 3-0, the series
That's
is
it.
over.
Yeah.
Now you're just trying to save face.
Right. Yeah.
So
and they won 2 games straight, if I remember correctly, and then they lose the last game of the series. They lose game 6, but yeah.
So you can go into it like that, like, okay, Gary, don't guard him, conserve yourself, use it but once you see, okay, we need you to guard him, you got to guard him, because at that time, if you look at the scores during that era, you got finals games that are 87-75.
Right.
So the pace of the game is not it's not to a point where, all right, we don't want you to guard him because the pace of the game is so fast.
Right.
It's slow down, grind it out.
Yes. Every possession mattered, and Peyton was a fantastic defender. I mean, it's one of those things where you look at those teams, and that's the 92 team meeting up with Portland. I remember thinking this Portland team might have a chance. Now, there was no dynasty, then the Bulls had won 1 title. But I'm like, this is going to be tough for Chicago, because
Portland had finals experience.
Yes.
They had lost to Detroit, but they had the experience. Yeah.
Everybody forgets that. And people do forget how good Clyde Drexler was. My personal opinion is, if you put just fountains of anger inside of Clyde Drexler, Portland could, Jordan was on a mission because he heard people talking about, real or imagined, that Drexler was as good as he was. Now, Clyde could fly. Clyde Drexler was amazing. I know it sounds crazy talking about The Last Dance and all that stuff, but Drexler, go on YouTube and type in Clyde Drexler highlights, and you will see stuff that is out of this world. But it's almost like and he's not talked about this way in the documentary, but it's almost as if he were too nice, because you have a Portland team with a fantastic point guard in Terry Porter, who is, 18-8, automatic in, as you said, a much slower game, and Buck Williams, and you've got Jerome Kersey. I mean, you have a front line. Kevin Duckworth could still play back by then, and he was monstrously huge.
You had Angels on that team?
Yes.
Right.
And that's right. I forgot about Danny Ainge coming off the bench. And so you had a real balanced club that could bring the pain if they needed to. But maybe Drexler was just too nice. I don't know.
I think and I think this is where, I mean, they touch on it throughout, but I think that this is lost in a lot of comparisons with Michael Jordan. While you might see players that might, in theory, match him athletically, or they can do similar things in terms of where they get certain shots in areas, the difference between Michael Jordan and everyone else is the relentless consistency with which he attacked. Yes. He attacked always, nonstop, from start to finish, every single night.
Right.
And for players, they play more so to get in the zone. Oh, I'm feeling it tonight, so I'm going to go for it tonight. Michael Jordan was trying to do that every night.
Right.
So when you go against him, you get a player which no one really brings this up. While there are great teams from that era, exceptional. None of those teams had perimeter scoring that can match Michael Jordan. They were all built interior-wise.
Right.
Patrick Ewing on the interior. Charles Barkley on the interior.
Right.
Shaq on the interior. But there was never a player that can match him scoring-wise. But in reality, no player really had the mentality to match him. You don't have to match him necessarily scoring 40 for 40, but are you attacking consistently? I think a lot of players got overwhelmed when they played him, and Clyde definitely got overwhelmed in that early final series.
Right, because the score – go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe he changed a bit once he got the championship in 95, but by then he's not the same Clyde.
Right.
When you're at your athletic apex, you have to be able to attack all the way.
Right, and Drexler could score. He had at least one season with 27 points a game. The thing with Drexler is he made it look easy. Like I remember the season he scored 27 a night for the year, 27 points a game, and you couldn't imagine, like, what? And there were dunks that you couldn't believe.
For him, that's like that's the apex of his MVP caliber ability. It's MVP caliber.
Right.
Now, to be an MVP player, like a Jordan or a Bird, you got to do that year in, year out.
Right. And I think be angry about it, because it's where the numbers don't do the job. It's the real big flaw in the metrics movement. And I like metrics. I've been reading Bill James since the late 1980s. I get it. But it's where the numbers fail, because when you look at Clyde Drexler, year 2 to year 8, let's say, just pulling his career out of thin air in my head, but the numbers are wonderful. The numbers are 20 to 27 points, 6 to 8 rebounds, 6 to 8 assists, and he was playing shooting guard. They had a point guard. They had Nate McMillan and they had Terry Porter. So it was never, here, Drexler, take the ball and rack up assists. No, he was that good of a passer where he'd have 6 to 8 assists a night with ease, drop 25 on all the top teams in the league. And until he gets to Houston with Olajuwon, they lose to Detroit, as you mentioned, and they lost to the Bulls. And it's some kind of X factor that is not measured in numbers. It's the big, gigantic flaw in this metrics stuff, which I have no problem with. I like stats. I'm good with that.
But if you know the player,
yes,
you understand why.
Yes.
When you look at a lot of those teams, a lot of those players didn't have that level of nasty.
Right.
The players that had the nasty, Larry Bird,
Yes.
Magic, Isaiah, Jordan,
Right.
they're the reason why they're the standard bearers of champions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at this era, there's not a lot of players with that nasty either.
Right.
You know, you have more sort of a AAU type of, environment where everyone's cool with everybody, which,
Yep.
again, I don't have an issue with it. I think the climate of the game changed for the better. One of the things I will say about that era, which it's great for the game, it's great for the rivalry. A lot of the game, branding wise, is built off of those rivalries, but the actual gameplay is much better. The
Mm.
flow of the game is cleaner. You don't necessarily have games that will be 4 quarters worth of 77 points. You'll have,
Right. Yeah.
quality scoring. But
Yeah.
I think what's missing is the underbelly of dislike, that anger.
Yes.
Even if I'm cool with you, Charles Oakley and Michael Jordan are great friends. Patrick Ewing and Michael Jordan are great friends.
Mm-hmm.
They, the tension that was built was necessary for those great series.
Mm-hmm.
And now you'll have a rivalry with Golden State and Cleveland for 4 straight years. They go to the finals, but it's not that underbelly.
Right.
It's not that seed of dislike.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that is reflected in the quality of play.
Yes.
Golden State would just run over Cleveland. By the time they got to June, it's like, yeah, LeBron's there, but I know Cleveland's going to win. Whereas
Right.
with Michael Jordan, you always knew that he was relentless, and that level of commitment was permeated throughout his team to win, and the
Right.
team going against him was equally committed, and it permeated throughout their team to beat him.
Yes. And that scene, that what you just said, I think it was in this last episode. I believe it was last night. It might have been last episode where 1996 Eastern Conference Finals, Orlando Magic versus Chicago Bulls.
Mm-hmm.
What is a series that nobody really remembers
Right.
because Jordan vaporized the Magic because he was angry about the previous year when Nick Anderson poked the ball away, which you never saw that happen except then. And he had it marked in his head. You know, there was a pin in the calendar for Eastern Conference Finals versus Orlando Magic because you knew they were going to win the Atlantic. So automatic. Back with that club, they were good.
Right. Brian Hill, head coach.
That Orlando club was stacked. And a young, you see the short clips they had of Shaquille O'Neal. He only weighed about 305 pounds, which for him was light.
In shape.
Yeah, and in shape. And with hair, and he was out of this world good, and 300 block shots a year. I mean, O'Neal was out of control, and that series has been erased from existence because Jordan had it mapped out that I'm going to get my revenge, and he did, and now they're just nothing.
What I also want to say too is Orlando was one of the teams that was able to see Jordan multiple times. So you were able to get, people always say when they bring up the competition for Jordan in the finals that a lot of the teams he only played one time.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to the finals, you had to play. I mean, we mentioned New York played him multiple times. Cleveland played him multiple times. Mm-hmm. Orlando played him multiple times.
Right.
Miami multiple times. So you're getting these teams in certain spaces that had multiple shots at him. One of the things I always give the Bulls credit for is they were always there at the end. So if you really wanted to see him,
mm-hmm.
if you really wanted to get your shot, they would be there. It's not as if, they won. And I don't want to take anything away from San Antonio because they're a dynasty in their own right.
Sure.
They didn't win back-to-back, but they were always there at the end. But I will say that for the Bulls, they were always there. So if Houston wanted to legitimize the theory of because for Jordan and Jordan enthusiasts like myself, I don't necessarily think they win 8 in a row, but I think they probably win 4 in a row. I think they probably win in '94
Mm-hmm.
because Jordan was just better than everybody.
Yeah, I think it's automatic. I don't think there's much. Anyone who says they would have lost, I would have say to whom, because
Right,
I think the 1994 title was theirs. Yeah,
right. Now '95 that is probably burnout. It's hard to win 5 in a row. That's just time and attrition.
right.
Okay. But one thing about Houston that hurts their argument when they say, well, they never played us, is the Bulls were there. They got to the finals consistently.
Mm-hmm.
The only time the Rockets went to the finals was that 2-year window. They never went back. They never were able to recreate in some fashion a way to get or become a contender again. And then
Right.
when they did get Barkley in '97, they lost at the buzzer to John Stockton, and they were never the same again.
Yeah. And before we go, because we're in a little bit over an hour, but people forget also as well that the Houston only because Pat Riley had a love affair with John Starks that that they won. Pat Riley has Hubert Davis and Rolando Blackman on the bench, and Starks shoots what you probably remember the numbers: 2 for 17, 3 for
He shot
18.
he shot 2 for 18 in 2 games. He shot 2 for 18 in game 1 and game 7.
That's yeah. I mean, and I like John Starks. I'm a Knicks fan. As embarrassing as that is over the last 20 years to say out loud, because it
Right.
used to not be an embarrassment. Now it is. But I'm a Starks fan. I'd be thrilled to meet John Starks and shake his hand. I think his story is amazing. But you can't. You're not going to win a title with that kind of performance out of the shooting guard spot. It's just not going to happen. I don't care
And
who else is on the team.
that was always the Knicks' Achilles heel against Michael Jordan.
Right.
I think that they built, not to be long-winded, I know we got to get out of here, but I just want to make this point about the Knicks.
Okay.
They built to their personnel very, very well. They built to their identity well, but they didn't build to the competition well.
Right.
If you build towards your identity, the identity is set. Defense first, set the tone. We got an anchor inside. We're going to play. But the team that you have to beat has a player that is so supreme that not only do they have the personnel that can match what you do, but they also have an X factor that you can't account for ever because
Right.
your perimeter scoring is so weak and inconsistent. So maybe the first couple of times you lose to Michael Jordan, 89, 91, okay, you see, we can play with them, but we can't beat them.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to figure out a way to get a perimeter player there, whether it be Dominique Wilkins or somebody that can match Jordan in some way. Because when he goes for his 54 points or his 42 points, you're stuck with whatever Patrick is doing and 15 points, 3 for 18 on the outside.
It's not going to work. Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. That's why the Drexler Blazer thing was always so interesting, because here's a team that has a shooting guard
Right.
that
Right.
can jump through the roof, drop 30 on anyone at any time, Phi Slamma Jamma from the University of Houston, Clyde Drexler. Like, they had that, and they were never able to capitalize. So this was good. I know we were planning on doing one next week. We should do one later in the week because there's a couple of things we haven't talked about. And then do another one after the series is over. But
hey man, we got nothing but time now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you and I as school teachers, we can do this regularly and give the knowledge to our legions of fans that they so crave.
Right, 100%.
All right, all right. Good. Well, Isaiah, give me again. You mentioned 2 social media addresses. Where are you again?
On Twitter, Ask Isaiah, AskIsaiah, and on Instagram, AskIsaiah. And you can catch my YouTube channel, Ask Isaiah, AskIsaiah on YouTube.
That's great. All right. Well, we'll leave it there, and let's meet again in a few days and go down some other paths in the topic.
break down. Most definitely. Thanks for the time.
Got it. You got it.